I have to say first, I'm 10 generations on my father's side, a Mainer, 10 generations Maine, and my mother was from Boston. So we sort of call that a mixed child, a person from half from away and half from. In Maine, if you've come to Maine, there's a whole thing about, are you from away or are you from here? At the age of 2, I just realized this about a year ago. My father had told me this story that I swallowed a penny when I was 2 years old. And he took me by the feet, upside down, and ran down the stairs with me. And the penny eventually, here I am, fell out. And so he told me that story a lot. He said, you turned blue, and so that turns out to be sort of an important point in this story of so-called Nancy. I'd never missed Mass until I was 21, and I went to catechism and did everything. We lived next door to the church. My great aunt laid the cornerstone. My grandmother kept reminding me. And the nuns, I remember, I don't know if you went to catechism, but the nuns talked about no beginning and no end. And it's like, no beginning, no end? How could there be no beginning and no end? It was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was at my grandparents', and my father and my grandparents were watching the TV, and everyone was very scared. Somehow I was told the story that in 1960, the Pope was going to open a letter from the Lady of Fatima. Did you hear this story? 1960? Yeah. So in 1960, this story, you don't have to know the details of the Lady of Fatima if you don't know it, but they saw the Virgin Mary in Portugal, and she told them whether there was going to be a World War III or not. I think I was in the 5th grade. All these things combined without probably me knowing it, and I laid awake at night just worrying and worrying and worrying about this letter, and really worrying. Then we moved next door, actually. We bought a house, sort of an old New England-style house. And my bed, my parents had bought a 4-poster bed at a yard sale, and it was high. It was like, I don't know, it was like this high off the ground, off the floor, and I was on the 2nd floor, and there was a stairway. There was no door in my bedroom, and there was a stairway. I was about 12 then, and somehow I would get really, really scared. Really scared. And this question of, do I exist or not, would come to me. And I would lose my sense of groundedness, of being on the earth, and like being in space, like there's no beginning, there's no end. It went into my thinking mind, and it drove me nuts. My mother wanted to medicate me. I would scream. I would stand at the top of the stairs, and I would scream. My throat would hurt so much I would scream. And the doctor would come, the old-fashioned doctor, Dr. Bull, and he would bring a paper bag with him. And he said, okay, breathe in and out of this paper bag. He said, it'll balance out your oxygen and your carbon dioxide. So it was the breath. It was the first introduction to the breath for me. And I would get these feelings like, do I exist or not? And what's up and what's down and what's beginning and what's the end and what? And I would go to my mother and I would stand beside her, but I wouldn't tell her what was going on because it was sort of a pre-verbal experience. And it had to do partly with being upside down, my father running down the stairs with me and not knowing what was up and what was down. And here I was in this big 4-poster bed at the top of the stairs. And so it just, all that, it all came to me, and it was horrible. It was really horrible. And my mother, like I said, wanted to medicate me, and I was too afraid of medication, so I fought that off. It's one of the few things I said no to with her. That's another part of it too, my story, is that she really, with very good intentions, really ran my life until I was 20, like told me when to cut my hair, what to wear, where to go to college, what to study, what to do when I finished college. So all of this came together, and my mother's, after the medication didn't work, she said, well, just be busy. So get busy, and then you'll forget about this deep feeling of do you exist or not. So I got really busy for a number of years. I went to college and then worked in Boston for a while. And then I went to San Francisco in 69, 70, and I saw a priest there, and I said, what is this? What's it all about? Anyway, I don't know if I used the words, do I exist or not? And I couldn't get any answers. So then I came back to Maine. I did some traveling. I went to Europe for 4 months. I went to Ireland, and I was a barmaid in Ireland for a few months. And I came back to Maine, and I was at my parents' house, and my brother called from Europe, and he said, I'm going to India. And without hesitation, I said, I'm coming too. I want to learn how to meditate, because that's where the Beatles went. And this was 1970. Also, I had gone to a Gestalt therapy workshop. And after the workshop was over, they said, next weekend we're having a meditation retreat. The woman opened the door to this large room that was pitch black. And I said to myself, no way am I going to spend a weekend in a pitch black room. And I ran, in my mind anyway. My body wasn't running as fast as my mind was, trying to get away from the pitch black room. So when my brother said he was going to India, and I said, yes, I'm coming too, I want to learn how to meditate, there was no hesitation. It was just like, I'm going. And I had a job. I told my employers that I was going to take a leave of 4 or 5 months, and I flew to Europe, and then I got on the Orient Express in Munich and took the 3-day Orient Express to Istanbul, where I met my brother and our neighbor that he was traveling with. And we spent a week in Istanbul, and then we went overland. We started our journey on the train in Turkey. And there was a woman on the train who said, oh yes, there's a meditation course in the Himalayas in Nepal, Kopan Monastery. That went into my brain, but it didn't go very far. Like, it didn't really sink, but it was there. We went from Turkey into Tehran, Iran, where we got our shot. We went to northern Iran, and then we crossed over the 12-mile no man's land in Afghanistan, where the men met us at the border, and they had turbans and big rifles, and their clothes were like way too big for them. And we had just left Iran, where the guys were in crew cuts, and they looked like Marines, the customs officers. And we got waylaid in Afghanistan for a while. Fortunately, we had had our shots, because the doctor dressed in white at the end of the corridor was giving shots to everyone. And when people got to Nepal, they were coming down with hepatitis. He was using the same needle for everyone. So in Afghanistan, we had a short but lovely journey. And we left pretty soon, and we heard that the border was going to be closed for 30 days. There was a big Arab conference. So we left for Pakistan. Our camera got stolen, and it got returned to us. And then into India, and hitting all the sort of the tourist spots in India, Delhi and New Delhi. My brother had gone to school with the ambassador from the U.S. to India, and so his son. So we went to visit the ambassador's residence, all kinds of like little funny excursions. Went to see the fires of bodies burning along the Ganges, the Taj Mahal. And this is all pre-Buddhism. I hadn't studied any Buddhism at all. So I went to Benares, and then got to the border of Nepal and took a hairpin turn bus into the mountains, into Nepal, and finally got to Kathmandu. In Kathmandu, there were a lot of sort of hippie types, but also a lot of hikers. We found a little, I guess you would call it we found some beds, let's put it that way. 3 beds in this little hotel, and the bathroom had no toilet paper. You wiped with your left and with water and ate with your right. We went on the Muktanath trek, up an amazing 2-week trek, I think it was, up into almost the border of Tibet, staying in tea houses. So meanwhile, I'm doing these treks, but in the back of my mind, there's this meditation interest. But the trekking was forefront then. And it was amazing with the mountains and hiking up the Kali Kandaki River near Dhaulagiri. and getting almost to the Tibetan border. And then we came back, and I went to Kopan Monastery for a visit. And it was, I walked through rice paddies to get there. It was a little hilltop, and there was a tiny little Gampa temple. And there was this one woman who was a Tibetan Buddhist nun, but she was an American from New York City. And this is an era when long hair was really in, and she had a shaved head, and her face was like a model's face, and it seemed like she had mascara on. I don't know if she did, but she was like this beautiful face and this short hair, which was sort of, at that time, sort of a little shocking. But also shocking were on the walls were these tankas or paintings of Tibetan deities that really looked scary. And I would look at them, and I said to her, I don't have to believe in that, do I, if I come and do this 1-month meditation course? And she said, oh, no, you don't have to. So I said, okay, I'm in. I'll be back in probably a week, I guess, a week's time. So I went back to my brother, and I said, I've decided to take this meditation course. And my brother said, well, we've decided we're leaving. We're going home. So this is an era before cell phones, before email. So I was halfway around the world, not knowing one person. So it was a little scary. And I came back to my little hotel, if you could call it that, totally flipped out. The question, do I exist or not? It was just beyond me. It was so I actually thought, well, what can I do? Here I am, halfway around the world, all alone, in this little, I don't know, hotel room, I guess you'd call it. It was sort of a cement floor with 3 beds in it. And I thought, well, I can go to the hospital and get medication, I guess, or I could commit suicide, or I could go to sleep. So I decided to go to sleep, and I woke up the next morning still with this great burning question, and went on another trek with a friend for 5 days, and this question and this mind was just outrageously scared. So after the trek, I went up to the monastery, and we were in a tent. There were a lot of us. There were like more than 100 people in this tent for this month-long Tibetan Buddhist meditation course. And the first meditation we did was a very detailed visualization of the Buddha. And then we imagined light, loving kindness and light coming from the Buddha to us. And then we passed it back. So we were passing it back and forth, and we became just loving light. It was amazing. And there were a lot of discourses, a lot of study, a lot of discourses, a lot of lectures. And the lamas there was Lama Zopa, who was from near Namche Bazaar, and Lama Zopa's teacher, Lama Yeshe, who had escaped from Tibet. He was, I don't know how old he was. He was probably in his late 40s at that time, or maybe 50. And there were like long horns blowing, and like little sandcastles and little mudra around the sandcastles, and it was just so exotic, so different. It felt like the 12th century I imagined like the 12th century of Tibet. And I couldn't understand their English. It was very broken, so I had to write down everything they said. That's the only way I could understand it. On March 26th, which was going to be my 26th birthday, which I had looked forward to being 26 on the 26th, since I was 7 years old. It was like my golden birthday. The lamas offered a death meditation on dying. I went to that place of total fear, really scared, beyond fear. It was just wild. I went running to Lama Zopa, who was young. He was probably in his 20s, now that I think of it, maybe late 20s. And he asked me questions like, where do you come from? Do you come from New York City? And I was telling him what was happening with me and how I was thinking of committing suicide. And he said, oh, your body needs all parts. It's like a clock. It needs all parts. And it's like, this doesn't make sense. So I ran to Lama Yeshe, and Lama Yeshe was in his little room, and he was in meditation, and his eyes were sort of fluttering, and he was like, "Come in, dear. Sit down, dear." "Yes, dear." I couldn't stop talking. "Oh, meditate, dear, meditate." And there was no way that I could meditate in this frame of mind. So I ran out of there and I went to Max. Max was an American who was also a Tibetan Buddhist nun. And I don't know her story. I know parts of it. Nepal didn't have many roads. They had just built their road from Kathmandu to Pokhara like a few years before, but she had a Rolls Royce or something. So I guess she was funding this whole thing. So I went to Max and I said to Max, I told her my story, and she said, "Oh, wonderful. How wonderful. Look at all these other people. They're just like doing their thing and you're having this experience. This is wonderful. So what I want you to do is to go into the meditation hall and go into the fear, like go right into it." And for some reason I did. I don't know why, but maybe because she was so holding. She just was holding, and she wasn't afraid of the state of mind. And she was like, "Oh, wonderful. The state of mind, it's wonderful." So I went into this horrible tunnel of fear, of dark fear. It was a tunnel that just kept cascading in on itself. And finally I came out the other end. As John Kabat-Zinn says, you can only go into the forest so far before you start coming out again. I came out and I walked up to the top of the King of Nepal's astronomer's hilltop, which is interesting because I have a love for dark skies. And I sat up there. It was right beside the not far from the tent where we were holding the meditation. And there was a full moon. And I just sat with the full moon, and it was an amazing experience. So I had this experience, and then the retreat went on for a couple more weeks. But I didn't really digest it. I didn't talk to anyone about it. So it was like undigested. And after the retreat was over, I went with a couple of retreatants, and we flew into Lukla and walked up to near Everest Base Camp for 2 weeks. And that was amazing. And came back down, and then flew back to New Delhi, and it was 113 degrees, I think, in New Delhi, no air conditioning. And then flew from there to Paris, where it was mind-boggling. I remember walking in a park, and this grandfather was playing ball with his granddaughter, who was dressed in this white starched little dress, and they were like bouncing the ball. And then flew back to Boston. My brother was like, "Are you stoned? What's going on with you?" And I wasn't, of course. And then went to some friends. But it was a very difficult time because I couldn't really talk with anybody about what was happening and what happened. And then the lamas came to Joshua Tree, so I took a bus out to California. And on the bus, I remember meeting these two Koreans who said, "Yeah, we're going to LA to meet a Korean Zen master." It's like, that's interesting. So I went to Joshua Tree and did I don't know how long, 2-week retreat with the lamas, and that was lovely. Came back to Maine, and then came over to the Morgan Bay Zendo on the coast of Maine that I had heard about in Nepal. And I thought, oh darn, Zen on the coast of Maine? I could have stayed right here. But I'm glad I didn't hear about it because it wasn't the right place for me. The teacher wasn't the right teacher. And then I found my way to the Cambridge Zen Center. George Bowman was the teacher. It was in Alston. And I had a wonderful retreat there. And I came back to Maine and then went back the next month. And it was the same teacher, which was really helpful to have the same teacher there. And I think I did that 3 times. And then I met Bill, who was also a Zen student going to Rochester Zen Center. And we started dating, and then I went to the Providence Zen Center for a month and did some retreats there. And someone said, you should need to become either a monk or get married. So I thought, well, I think I'll get married. So there I was with Bill, and he was a Buddhist, so why not? So we got married, and he was a boat builder. We went to our wedding in a boat that he built. on a beach. We had it was written up in the papers because it was at that time it was unusual not to get married in a church, but to get married on a beach with arriving by boat was so there was a huge article in the local paper, a lot of photographs. And then we went on a 45-day sailing trip with his apprentices, 6 apprentices and 13 campers. And then after that, we moved to the Providence Zen Center. I was there for a week and realized I was pregnant. I had always wanted children, but the timing wasn't great because I really wanted to do a 3-month retreat and delve into practice. So I did a 3 weeks of Kilche. My son was born at home at the Providence Zen Center. We had a house across the street that belonged to the Zen Center, and it was during a retreat. So people came over. We had arranged ahead of time that people could come to the birth. So 20 people from the retreat came into the room, and so I gave birth with 20 Zen Center people. And I think the reason was because I wanted them to bond with Bubs. That's we called him, his nickname. So we lived in the White House, and it was not easy because all the food was over in the Maine Zen Center. So eventually, Eloise started bringing breakfast. But it was quite a feeling, like lying in bed and seeing the dust build up and not being able to clean the room. I remember that part. And when Bubs was 3 months, they asked us to move back in the Zen Center. So we moved into the lounge area. And at that time, the lounge area had windows, little, like very short windows, like cellar windows that looked outside. And there was a ramp that went up to the second floor. And it was the lounge and the bathroom. So we had the lounge and the bathroom. And I used to put signs outside by the robe rack saying quiet zone so that Bubs wouldn't wake up in the morning with people talking. And after nursing him all night, I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to practice. I was also at that time knitting sweaters, which was really challenging to be knitting sweaters and have a baby and not to have much sleep. So it was really hard training. And upstairs at that point, Kilche was happening. Sometimes I would chant Kwanzaa Bosal, and I was told later that people could hear me chanting Kwanzaa Bosal while I was knitting, while they were sitting during Kilche. Sun Sunim would come and go. One time he was in New York, and he drove back from New York with Saul Sandpearl in a very small car. And the whole way back, he carried this very large stuffed unicorn. There was one in the back seat for Annie, and Sun Sunim held Bubs's in the front seat for 4 or 5 hours from New York City in this tiny car. That was very, very sweet. I also remember always wanting to be given a box of chocolates. And Sun Sunim, he brought the children and the pregnant mothers a box of chocolates. And I just could not find the generosity in my heart to share it with other people. I just wanted that whole box of chocolates. That was like a dream to have a box of chocolates. When I was pregnant with Jamie, I was working, with Bubs. Around 6 months, I became the kitchen master. That's right, because I couldn't knit anymore. So I got the job of kitchen master, which paid my room and board at the Zen Center. So I would go shopping and just be in charge of the kitchen. And at one point, Link wanted to put new countertops in, and he asked me to pick out some countertops, and I picked out bright orange. So that caused quite a stir in the Zen Center to have bright orange counters. People were talking about that for a while. So then when Bubs was about 2.5, I became pregnant with Jamie. Bill was invited to go to Korea to study the roof, the Korean-style curves on roofs, because the temple was starting to be discussed to build this Diamond Hill Monastery, the temple. Actually, another thought I had just then was they built the hot tub, and I remember having this sort of opening ceremony of the hot tub in the hot tub room, and Bill had done a lot of work on it, and we were all standing thanking people, and Bill, fully clothed, jumped into the hot tub. It was a nice moment. It was very cute. I do remember that while I was pregnant, I came to Maine for a couple of months. So I had lived there now for like 4.5 years. It was very challenging. It was very, very challenging to live at the Providence Zen Center, being a mother, and practicing and being a mother. Both were so, I was passionate about both. So pregnant with Jamie and living upstairs in this apartment, I would get up still like at 4:30 in the morning and go across the street and go to practice. Bill would stay with Bubs, and then Bill would practice at night. So the apartment, we had a living room, dining room, and a little teeny tiny kitchen, and 2 teeny tiny rooms. There was a couple, Carol Marshall and Barry Marshall, who lived there, who had, their son was born. He was maybe a month old. Carol and I and her son, and I was 9 months pregnant, went to the Lincoln Mall for lunch. And Carol said, "Oh, would you mind going across the parking lot to get the car?" And I knew then that if I walked that distance that I was going to go into labor soon. So that night I did go into labor. Bill was sick. We had a midwife that came. Bubs went downstairs with Bobby, and Jamie was born upstairs in the yellow house. And it was actually a very lovely birth. Now I had a 3.5-year-old and a new baby, and the temple was being built. Bill would go and work on the temple, this amazing temple. We lived there until Jamie was a little over a year old. The monastery was finished, and we moved to Florida we drove to Florida with 2 kids with hardly any money. I think we had $13 when we arrived. And so we were eating rice and beans, and the family members were going, "How come you're eating, that's all you eat are rice and beans?" And Bill got a job in a restaurant, and we stayed there for about 4 months, and then we moved back to the Cambridge Zen Center. The guys there found a job for him, knowing that especially I wanted to get back to the New England. And we lived in the Cambridge Zen Center, and then lived next door, and then lived in the teeny tiny little apartment near the parking lot. Then Mark Houghton found us a house down the road that we could buy. So we bought that house. It was a sweet little house, but it was in a terrible neighborhood. It was in a very low income near the projects, and it was hard living. And then Bill found a girlfriend, and so he moved out. And Nancy was left as a single mom in this house, 2 children, working full time, trying to get to the Zen Center. Son Sunim had said, "You become a teacher," and I think it was 1989. And then he said, "You do your koan practice with Mark Houghton. Finish your koan practice with Mark." But I was single parenting, and I could hardly make it to the Cambridge Zen Center. So this great question of, do I exist or not, was still like, it wasn't answered, even though I had been studying all these years. And Sun Sunim would say, put your thinking down. But I didn't really know the difference between thinking and not thinking. I couldn't put it down because I didn't know what it was. I didn't have it up. You have to have it up before you can put it down. George was my teacher when he left. And when he left, I was devastated in so many different ways. But finally, somehow I got it. I got it that, I've been trying to answer this by thinking. And that was driving me crazy. It's before thinking. That's where I need to go. That was huge. And I was also starting to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction. And the body scan was really helpful to me, being more aware of the body. Eventually, I moved back to Maine. Maine is it's my home. It's my home. I'm rooted in Maine. I needed to be in Maine. I had lived at the Morgan Bay Zendo in a tiny little chicken coop, 6 by 8 feet. I had lived there for 3 months. I would leave my chicken coop and come over to visit this Zen student that was studying at the Morgan Bay Zendo, then called Moonspring Hermitage, with Walter Noack. He was a musician and repaired musical instruments. And an elderly lady lived in the house, and I would go back to my chicken coop saying, I'd love to buy that house and fix it up. So 20 years went by, and I came to visit,
and the house was for sale. So it was no question of where I would be living in Maine, especially with the Morgan Bay Zendo right across the road where I could practice. So it was like heaven. Like, oh, here I am in Maine. Across the road is the Morgan Bay Zendo. I moved here. My sons were both out of high school. They were in college. And I started my journey in around 2002 back home in Maine. So in 2014, I went to Korea finally. I had never been to Korea before. I went with The Whole World as a Single Flower for 2 weeks and then stayed for another 3 weeks after that. It was wonderful. I had a wonderful experience of Korean Buddhism. It sort of tied everything together for me. My Tibetan Buddhism, the Korean Buddhism, my studies with Sunim, Providence Zen Center. One of the Sunim's teachers and I decided to go across country and to visit Dokhyung Sunim. Dokhyung Sunim was a monk. He had been studying with Jacob Pearl, who had passed away. So I think he was a little lost. And we went over to visit him. It was a day's journey by bus across the country. We took a taxi, and his place was so beautiful. It had 4 layers to it. So the first, you drive up to the first layer into the parking lot, little parking lot, and the housekeeper lived there with her washing machine and dishwasher and sort of the necessary appliances, and then walked up a few steps to the pond. And on the pond, it was covered with lotus leaves and had a floating tea house on it. And then you walked up a few more steps to the next 3rd level, and that's where the Dharma center was. And it was a very small little building built out of rock and clay. The cushions were gray raw silk, and the Buddha was lovely. In the corner, there were some steps up to the 2nd floor, and it was a tree with steps cut out of it. And there was a crack in the wall that had been painted gold, and everything was very attended to. And on the upstairs, you'd go outside and climb the stairs and duck your head and go in, and there was a wood stove and a little tea table. We sat and had tea with Dokhyung Sunim's brother, who was a carpenter, and I remember he had on these sort of brownish pants that he said were dyed with persimmons, and persimmons didn't smell. Cloth with persimmons, dyed with persimmons, didn't smell. And we sat and had tea for a few hours. And then the next day we had tea again, but this time Dokhyung Sunim had returned from Seoul. He was teaching at the university. And I was so taken by his pouring of the tea. Like he would take his tea kettle, his teapot, and pour it and catch each drop. It was like there would be 4 teacups, and he would catch each drop. And it was just these moments of just catching the drop that was so important. I chose this house across the road from the Morgan Bay Zendo because it was across the road from the Morgan Bay Zendo. I was looking for a place in Maine that had a practice community where I could practice. That's what the Morgan Bay Zendo is about for me. It's a place of practice, and it's this beautiful place that's 5 minutes walk from the road. In the springtime, there are frogs that we can hear. We can hear the rain when it's raining, can hear crows. It's very much in nature. I started the Tea House Zen, which is in my tea house, by my house, which is across the road from Morgan Bay Zendo. And it has a strong relationship with the Morgan Bay Zendo because I am able to do workshops and retreats in this beautiful, beautiful place. I'm on the board of the Morgan Bay Zendo. There's no teacher here, no specific teacher. It's run by a board. Basically, it's a beautiful place to practice and a lovely place to offer to my Dharma friends to come and visit and to offer retreats and workshops. So in the tradition of the Sun Sunim's teaching in the Quantum School of Zen, he taught about our situation, our relationship, and our function. And what is our correct situation? What is our correct relationship? What is our correct function? So we have a situation, and then what is our relationship to that situation? Maybe we're guest, or maybe we're host. So if we're a guest, what's our function as guest? Wherever we are, if we're visiting someone, if we're in a temple, what function? So we keep this not knowing mind, this question. It's in our hara, it's in our whole body, it's in our all the senses. It's like, what is this? What right now? And we're like alert and awake, and sometimes we call it on fire with attention. And we live our life like that in this practice of Zen. Also, Sun Sunim's teaching is about 4 kinds of like this. It's like before like this, which is just the way things are. Become one like this. So how do we show that? How can we demonstrate that? So in our school we hit like this is like don't know, and it just like stops all the thinking. And then only like this is spring comes, the grass grows green, sky is blue, sugar is sweet, salt is salty. Just the factual, the way things are. And then just like this, again, is like, what's our function? What's our relationship to this moment? So would you like a cup of tea? Or if someone comes and they're hungry, it's like, oh, would you like something to eat? If someone comes and they're thirsty, oh, would you like something to drink? Very simple practice. So we live our lives like that, not knowing, but open to really, really open to the moment. Welcome.
So finally, do you exist or not?
You already understand. Let's drink tea.